What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the PFF Pro Football Focus Show here for Week 4. Here are my homies, Tyler Beaker and Scott Barrett from PFF. Scott, Week 3, a little strange. Everything worked out. Just kind of go back in time. Week 1, the chalk went bananas. Week 2, the chalk didn't hit. Week 3, some of the high-owned plays did, but the NFL in general was just a complete disaster. That's what they say. Every Sunday matters in the NFL.
Yeah, Week 3 sucked. I didn't make a single dollar in tournaments. I had this great intro from like a really old article on a week that just like made zero sense. Where I'm like, yeah, there's a giraffe in my backyard in flames. Like the world is a Salvador Dali painting. That's how little sense the world makes right now. And like that's how I feel about Week 3. I mean, the Browns won. Like that should
Browns are going to the playoffs. I've been expecting this for a while now that Baker the Baker's dozen, he filed for the trademark Baker dozen or something like that. I saw today. He's going to be pretty popular this week. We'll get to him in a minute. But Tyler, how was your Week 3? My Week 3 didn't really go too well. Cash games didn't go too well on DraftKings. Over on Fantasy Draft, it worked out a little bit better for me. But overall, I think I lost a couple of bucks last week.
Yeah, it sounded like I chose a very good weekend to be on vacation. I played very light this past week, and I think I ended up escaping while most people crashed and burned.
Yes. Speaking of vacations, you guys, I don't know who's subbing in for you, but in the middle of October, I got my birthday. I got to go. You guys won't know this, but all the other listeners that watch RotoGrinders on a daily basis, where does my girlfriend like to go? She likes to go to Disney, so we're going to Disney for my birthday in the middle of October. So we'll get you a nice sub to fill in for me. But let's get into this. We've got studs, duds, and a value pick at each position, backed up by plenty of statistics you can find over at Pro Football Focus. So, Scott, let's start with you at quarterback this week. It worked Week 1. It didn't work out Week 2. It worked out Week 3. Why can't it work out Week 4? Drew Brees against the Giants. It's on the road, right? So Drew Brees, he does have a little bit of home road splits, but that's not deterring you at all from going all in on Drew Brees.
No, I don't care at all. It's just, a perfect smash spot. Giants can't pressure the quarterback. Their secondary is atrocious and in shambles. Janoris Jenkins ranks bottom 5 of like 80 qualifying cornerbacks in fantasy points per route and coverage. So I'm not worried about a potential shadow situation on Michael Thomas there. I think also, the Saints defense is probably the worst in the NFL. It's such a pass funnel defense. I think DVOA, which I hate quoting, but they rank best in run DVOA and worst in pass DVOA. They also rank worst in pressures allowed per dropback. So that's been Eli's like biggest flaw so far, is just like constantly under pressure. So obviously I think there should be a ton of scoring on both sides. And Brees is back, baby. Yeah, he's got the volume working for him. And we need to start looking at him like he's the Drew Brees of 2016, 2015, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in which case he's grossly underpriced by about $1,000, I'd say.
Yeah, in DraftKings, it's too like the top tier of quarterback, the highest priced quarterback, 68, and we have like Baker Mayfield at 5,300. $1,500 difference separates all the quarterbacks that you have there. So it's pretty easy to get Drew Brees if you want him this week. I was toying around with a bunch of builds. You can get him with Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas and still like the rest of your team this week. So it's going to be a pretty chalky week. I think Brees is probably going to buy from one of the highest owned quarterbacks out there by the time it's all said and done. Tyler, let's go to you. So I used one of his targets last week. I used Will Fuller in my cash games. He was basically the only guy on my cash games that did anything good for me. Still didn't pull me through the cash lines on those. But you got Watson. He's chucking it deep. He's in a dome. The Indianapolis defense, we all thought it was going to be horrible. Now, it's not horrible, but it's not great either. I love this pick. I'm expecting a couple of deep balls to his favorite targets.
Yeah, it's an interesting week here. We got no Chiefs, no Steelers, and no Rams. Those are 3 of the most potent offenses.
Play that Thursday slate. It's loaded. I mean, you can do whatever you want in that Thursday slate.
I'm definitely loading up there as well. But Deshaun Watson, I love the play here. Fast pace and a plus matchup. The Texans' passing attack could take flight this week. They're playing inside in the dome. This game combines 2 of the league's fastest offenses against 2 pass funnel defenses. The Colts have allowed the 5th highest completion percentage. against opposing quarterbacks. And Watson is coming off the heels of two really good fantasy outings, 26.8 DK points in week 2, 29.0 week 3. And I'm going to put my money in this matchup on Watson, who can throw it further than 60 yards downfield and has two studs at wide receiver, like you mentioned. They're in great matchups here against Indy's corners.
Bless you, Scott. Sneezed all over your camera. I saw that during the break. Yeah, but I love both those plays. I think you can play. I mean, I'm not playing Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. I don't know. I think those are clearly the two guys. I like Matt Ryan. And then there's a couple of cheap quarterbacks I think you can mix in today. So at the high end, we've got that out of the way. Scott, if you've recovered from your sneeze here, let's go value quarterbacks. You got a couple of guys. I mean, we've got almost near minimum price quarterbacks in CJ Beathard. We've got guys like Baker Mayfield or Baker's Dozen, whatever you want to call him. I like a guy, Andy Dalton. I didn't see him on anybody's sheet here, so I wanted to mention him. Just a lot of good value plays at quarterback this week.
Yeah, I mean, CJ Beathard's definitely in play. He's only 4,600 on DraftKings. Before the game that got him benched last year, you put up 14.2 fantasy points in 2.5 quarters, then 16.4, then 12.7, then 18.4, then 26.0. So like his average is basically 4x value right there. The Chargers are struggling without Bosa in terms of pressures per drop back, opposing passer rating, fantasy points allowed. Also, Josh Allen, as much as I hated him coming out as a prospect, he's averaging more rushing expected fantasy points per game than Cam Newton. Eli Manning, I already touched upon briefly in a smash spot. So you have to like him, even with OBJ in a shadow situation, Evan Ingram out, still more to like than not. But these are like the three guys after Baker I'm looking at when it comes to the cheaper quarterbacks. But really, my guy is Baker. We started with me here. Tyler, 9 times out of 10, beats me to the sheet and steals all my favorite guys. So my guy since February has been Baker. Of course, I'm playing him this week. But Tyler, let's hear your case.
Yeah, what do you got, Tyler? That's it should be a really strong play in my opinion.
Yeah, you got to want it, Scott. You got to get to that sheet before me, man. Baker is such a great bargain this week. He's QB 17 on both sites. He's been my set and forget QB since Monday. Once I started filling out dummy lineups, I'm just going to leave him in my cash lineup and not worry about it. He's already shown impressive arm, great pocket awareness, and he's got rushing upside as well. I mean, there's so many things to like here. Oakland's a sieve of a secondary. They're allowing a whopping 8.7 yards per attempt to opposing quarterbacks. Last year's worst defense was 8.0 for some perspective there. Sprinkling a little bit of negative game script here for Baker. They're 3-point dogs on the road, and you've got a recipe for Baker to just go nuts here, throwing, rushing, just accruing fantasy points left and right.
That line's off, by the way. Cleveland's going to win this game, in my opinion. Good targets, no pass rush. John Gruden can't find any pass rushers, probably because you traded them all away, buddy. But yeah, I just think it's going to be easy, clean pockets, and you can see what Baker did in that first game, just darts all over the field. What a huge difference this is going to make for Cleveland moving forward. So I'm on that as well here. A couple of duds. So, Tyler, we just talked about CJ Beathard. At least Scott did a little bit of being viable. You've got him as your dud here. So I'll flip this back to you. Why are you hating on Beathard here?
For those with short memories, Beathard was pretty horrendous last year. Outside of peppering Carlos Hyde with targets, he sank the San Francisco offense and didn't provide many fantasy points. The only reason you're really playing him here is you're hoping for a rushing upside and a rushing score. The Chargers allowed just one rushing touchdown dating back their last 19 games. I'd rather save salary with Baker, to be honest, instead of trying to save a couple $100.
Yeah, and Scott, this guy is completely – this whole offense – except for the running back, is off my radar in DFS. In today's NFL, you can't play players from this team. You've got Dak Prescott as your dud. And this dude is just erased from my DFS lineups pretty much for the rest of the year.
Yeah, he stinks. This is a game where Zeke smashes. I recently built like a model to figure out like what a player's pricing should be. And per my model, he should be like $1,300 cheaper.
I thought you were going to say $1,300 because I might play him at that.
Right. So yeah, avoid him this week for sure.
Yeah, agree completely. I do like Zeke. Maybe we'll talk about him in a minute here. So Scott, I'll stay with you in a stud. We've got one of the best receivers in the league, but he happens to be rosterable in fantasy as a running back. This is obviously Alvin Kamara. You like Drew Brees. And until Mark Ingram comes back, we're going to have to see. I feel like the Saints have just decided we've got Drew Brees. He's still really good. We're just going to pass the ball. I think it's something like almost like 70% of the time or something like that this season. They're just rifling it out there. It's the Giants defense. All these opportunities he gets. Sure, he might not be the best rusher, but when you're getting 30-plus opportunities between targets and rushes in a game, that's no problem. I think he's easily going to be the highest owned running back of the week.
Yeah, and he really should be. And you're right. That is another reason I like Drew Brees. He basically has a wide receiver as his running back. So all of the fantasy points Kamara racks up, chances are Brees is going to be connected to those. But yeah, his volume has been amazing with Ingram out. So actual opportunity, we'll talk about this in a little bit. But he leads every player in expected fantasy points, and he leads running backs by 8.2 expected fantasy points per game. That's crazy.
Devin, if you want to bring that up, I forgot about the opportunity knock segment. So I've got it up on my screen here. So producer, if you want to cue it up on the screen share, I got it for you.
All right. Well, let me pull it up then. All right. So Kamara leads the way, and it's not particularly close. Adam Thielen's a surprise. He's actually second best among all players. He's first among all wide receivers, significantly ahead of Stephon Diggs, though Diggs is still in that high-end wide receiver 2 range. You'll see Juju Smith-Schuster finally edging out Antonio Brown. He's bested Brown in targets as well as expected fantasy points in each of the last 2 weeks. Michael Thomas is just, an utter absurdity. He's top 5 in expected fantasy points. He's number 1 in actual fantasy points. And then still somehow that's, it's not really doing him justice because he's also easily the second most efficient player in terms of this metric. Only Deshaun Jackson ranks above him on a per game basis. Jarvis Landry is a guy you'll hear me talk about in a little bit. Christian McCaffrey just dominating in expected fantasy points, but also expected fantasy point market share. He's top 5 easily. And even in expected touchdowns, he's not as bad as you might think. Robert Woods is a guy who I wrote about in this column last week. I was saying do not sleep on him. He's seeing better usage than any of the other wide receivers on the team, and it's not close. And that's despite being drawing Patrick Peterson for 66% of his routes in week 2. So it's no surprise to me that he had a big game in week 3. You'll notice Joe Mixon on here. I also wrote up Giovanni Bernard, who had a massive week 3 in terms of expected fantasy points, as did Antonio Callaway. I talk about Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley, and why I think Taylor Gabriel is a fantastic DFS contrarian play this week, especially if their rookie wide receiver in the slot doesn't suit up this week. He's day-to-day with a dislocated shoulder.
Yeah, one of the rules in the NFL, follow the money. They paid Taylor Gabriel, and he's making the rounds this week is a pretty good play. So if you want to read Scott's actual opportunity, you can get part of this. We'll go over some other stuff earlier, but this is kind of Scott's baby. Lots of good information and actionable stuff you could use in DFS on his article. If you got a PFF sub, go check it out. So obviously we talked about Alvin Kamara.
Finish up.
Yeah, let's get back to it.
Yeah, so he ranks 4th in targets among all players, 6th in receiving expected fantasy points, and 9th in rushing expected fantasy points. So basically by volume, you're right. He's like a low-end RB1 plus a high-end wide receiver 1, like in one player, which is just like ridiculous. He's also seeing amazing usage near the end zone. He's seen 13 opportunities inside the 10-yard line. That's 3 more than the next closest player. And if you'll scroll all the way down to that actual opportunity article, you'll see the best value plays based on site pricing versus expected fantasy points per game. And Kamara's actually my number 1 value on FanDuel. Like he's so expensive, but he's still a value based on how amazing his volume's been. So he's a guy I'm probably going to have near 100% exposure to this week.
I didn't even know you had this. Is this new or has that always been there?
Has always been there.
Oh, my goodness. I don't read far enough down on your article, Scott. All right, let's go back to opposite running back in this game, Tyler. Saquon, kind of I don't know, a thrift shop. Elvin Kamara gets a lot of targets because Eli Manning likes to check down. You've got Evan Ingram out of the passing game. You figure they're going to need a lot of points to keep up with the Saints here. I could easily see Saquon turning in a top 3 or 4 performance this week.
Yeah, building off Scott's actual opportunity, the number 2 back, Saquon Barkley. We've seen this game climb to 50 points since its opening. I think most people are going to look to either OBJ or Shepard in the passing attack, and Saquon could be a really contrarian way to gain access to this potential shootout. Not a lot of people are willing to pay up for a running back at Saquon's price. They're probably just going to go right to Kamara. I think Saquon's in that weird spot where he might get pretty low ownership this week, but the guy's seen at least 20-plus touches in each game, played on 78% of the team's total snaps, and he's just a great shoe-in here for a potential shootout here. Barkley showed he can be just as dangerous of a weapon on the backfield, 14 receptions in week 2. And like I said, if you can't get enough room to jam in Kamara, I think Saquon's a good fallback option.
Yeah, currently Saquon projected, it's early in the week, so these always dial in later in the week. But he's projected at 20% owned. That's probably, I don't know, the 4th or 5th highest owned running back out there. Kamara's easily leading the way. You can the DraftKings lineups, they look a little nicer today. You got some good players you can get in there at a couple spots this week. So I don't think people are going to be struggling to find value, and that's going to allow them to get guys like Kamara and Saquon in there pretty easily. Scott, your value, Gio, right? This hinges on Mixon. There's a chance he could play. We don't really know. It's a little murky early in the week, but we've seen this. You just take pass-catching running backs against the Falcons, and you don't think twice. If Mixon's out, Gio will be on McCash teams on DraftKings.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's also seeing easy high-end RB1 usage when Mixon's out. So it's been like 4 games since last year. He's averaging 20.4 fantasy points per game, 86% of the snaps, 82% of the team's running back touches. And yeah, like as bad as Atlanta has been in the past, or in the Dan Quinn era, which is like worst easily, far worse this year. You know, Deion Jones out, Keanu Neal out. We've talked about this.
Yes, so I'll load up on your pass-catching running backs against Atlanta until further notice. Tyler, you've got Lamar Miller in here, so I'm going to challenge you with, we know what Lamar Miller is.
A very meh play.
Yeah, so I'm going to challenge you with a couple lesser-owned plays than him, and I'm going to see if you like any of these guys more. We've got Chris Carson. They wanted to run the ball more. Pete Carroll, he had his way. He ran the ball more last week. He's going up against Arizona, just absolutely hemorrhaging fantasy points to opposing running backs. We've got Kerryon Johnson. I'm a little worried about the pace in that game. We've got Sony Michel, too, who looks like he's on pace for probably 20 touches this week. With Rex Burkhead hitting the IR, they're all cheaper than Lamar Miller. Is Miller still your guy?
I like Kerryon, but the one thing I'm a little bit worried about him is he kind of needs to hit that 100-yard rushing bonus, not really involved in the passing game a ton. Same with Carson. It took him 32 carries to get to 100 yards last week. Sony Michel.
It hits the bonus.
It does. Touche. Sony is a wild card. I'm not entirely sure where I stand on that. I'm kind of leaning more James White just because I play a little bit more on DK. But Sony Michel could gain some more steam as we enter the weekend. Honestly, I think Lamar's just a very safe cash game play where I think he's going to see at least 17 touches. He's averaging over that per game so far this season. His 5K mark on DK is the lowest he's been since October of 2015. Indy has allowed at least 18 points to their opponent's top scoring running back now in 3 straight weeks. It's a pretty good matchup here. Guy sees work out of the backfield as a rusher and a receiver. I think he's just a solid cash option. He's currently our 3rd highest value play through our DFS lineup optimizer on DK. Like I said at the beginning, he's a meh play, but if you need some salary savings, I think he's a viable option in cash.
Scott, real quick on Michelle, you think this is going to be like we currently have him projected really low owned? I don't know if that hasn't taken into effect the Rex Burkhead news, but after all his touches last week, he did see 3 targets. They still have James White. If you think the Patriots can win this game, you got to expect Sony Michel in there in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, I actually like that. I think that's a pretty good call. And what a lot of people aren't realizing is, well, one, Tom Brady does not look right this year. He's our 14th highest rated quarterback, which is really bad by Tom Brady's standards. But on top of that, Miami's pass defense has been sort of incredible this year. They lead the league in opposing passer rating. and also interceptions with 7, and also passing touchdowns allowed with 2.
A couple of dud running backs. We'll get on out of here. Scott, Peyton Barber. I'm not convinced Ronald Jones doesn't start to make an appearance because Barber just has not been able to get anything done. And going up against Chicago, easiest fade on the board for me this week. You took the easy way out here, Scott.
I guess I did, and you said my argument for me. So.
All right, Deion Lewis. This is always interesting. There's something going on with
I
Rashard.
disagree.
I always like Deion Lewis, especially on DraftKings. But Tyler doesn't like him. Tyler, why do you hate him? And then Scott, why do you like him when
Right.
Tyler's done?
So the reason to like him is as a receiving outlet against this really tough run defense. Philly, by the way, they've allowed the least amount of rushing yards in 2018 after doing the same thing in 2017. So running against them is not really an option. Deion Lewis, 4 targets combined over the last 2 weeks. Not really being used there, despite Marcus Mariota having the noodle arm. No, I'm just not playing him.
Scott, rebuttal.
Yeah, so 4 targets, but those were 2 victories that no one saw coming. I think Philly smashes.
Victories.
And that definitely benefits Lewis, who dominates workload when the team's trailing 15 carries and 8 targets to Henry's 5 carries and 0 targets.
The cheap, the sub 5K running back, there are a lot of options this week. It's going to be interesting to see where it all shakes out. That's all said and done. All right, let's get to some of the fun stuff here at PFF. Scott, I've got pulled up. So I missed last week. I was trying to find some of the bigger edges that the green line was showing everybody. And I missed last week, but we got the first 2 weeks right here. So I've pulled up green line, and it's got the Pats over-under on the green line side hitting at 50.5 for the markets at 47.5. So what's your thoughts on this? Can this Patriots game go over? Do you expect them to get going at home against the Dolphins? You just talked about their defense a little bit. What's right here? Is green line right? Is Vegas right? Or is it something in the middle going on?
Yeah, I actually think Vegas is closer to accurate. But then again, every time I've said that about green line so far, I've been proven wrong. But like I said, yeah, the thing for me is, Miami's pass defense looks really good this year. Patriots pass offense does not look as good, to put it nicely. And now Rex Burkhead's out as well. I don't really see that happening, but who knows? I mean, Patriots pass defense has struggled. There's a lot of injuries on both sides. We'll see.
The Patriots look slow on defense. They can't cover anybody right now. Couple any miscommunication on that Patriots defense is almost like an automatic touchdown for the other team right now. So I just wanted to highlight on Greenline, a fun sports betting product offered by PFF. Tyler, I always like to talk to you. You don't write this article, Pat Thorman does, but it's so good every week. I know you look at it. It's something I read every week. There are a lot of really good nuggets in here from teams that don't, like the Texans here. You're looking on the screen here, and Colts. It looks like they're kind of middle of the average in plays. But when you're done reading Pat's breakdown, you can expect this game to have a ton of snaps on both sides of the ball. Kind of same thing with the Atlanta Bengals game. They're all the way down here, but they're probably going to play up on the other end of this range. There's so much good information in here. What are a couple other things that stood out for you this week?
You actually kind of just stole my notes there. How Pat does such a great job of just digging further than seeing if you're doing this research on your own and you just see these teams like the Texans, Colts, Falcons, Bengals are middle of the pack or end of the pack. They're actually games to target because these are just plays per game, not plays allowed per game. He does a great job diving into it, seeing not only the plays per game, but the seconds per snap, no huddle rates, and which games you should really target here for DFS. The more plays and the more volume we can expect, the higher fantasy outings we can target then.
Yeah, if you're playing this the Thursday slate, I'm loading up on the Thursday slate because this is like a really fun tournament slate. You got the Vikings and Rams, and then you get access to all the high-scoring games on Sunday and Monday night. So I'm playing a lot on that. This Ravens-Steelers game, not only are there tons of plays, but I don't know. I just think that game is going to go absolutely nuts. Really great article that Pat always does. Pat, if you're watching, thank you. This is one of my favorite articles to read every single week. So let's jump into a wide receiver here. Hold on. Where is it on the sheet? All right, Tyler, you had your redemption, right? Week 2 was fade Michael Thomas week, and you learned your lesson on week 3. you decided to then tout Michael Thomas. And you have continued to learn your lesson to never fade Michael Thomas. He is your stud value player of the week. And I've mentioned this a couple of times. It's not that hard to get Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas in your DraftKings lineups this week together.
Yep, I'm going back to the well of Michael Thomas. I mean, what's there to say? The guy just catches everything thrown his way. He's now caught 38 of 40 targets for 398 yards and 3 touchdowns. His price has reached the point where it's not quite a slam dunk play, but it's hard to fade the highest scoring wide receiver in the second highest game of the slate. Fantastic matchup here against Janoris Jenkins, who's allowed the 5th most receiving yards already entering this matchup. He's probably going to fall to number 1 by the time this game's over. Michael Thomas, lock and load.
I saw you had a tweet earlier about Julio Jones too. What's your thoughts on him? I think he makes for a fine wide receiver 3 this week. I'm just kidding.
People love to hate on Julio, and after that huge game by his teammate Calvin Ridley, I'm going to go back to the Julio well. He's still a great play in a great matchup, and I think he'll have a lower ownership than most people.
Yeah, anyone that used him last week instead of Ridley, that was me and a couple of my tournament teams kicking themselves off for not getting enough Ridley exposure. Scott, so at your wide receiver, you talked a little bit about Baker Mayfield. You got to like Jarvis Landry now, right? There's no Josh Gordon. That looks like Baker Mayfield is going to elevate this entire – I mean, you can make a strong case for any pass catcher that's on the Browns right now. But Landry just looks like a surefire 10-plus targets in this game. I might be a little worried that Cleveland's defense is going to be so good that they just get up somehow and they don't need to pass and then Hyde takes over. But before that happens, you got to expect Landry to get his.
I mean, if you think that's the most likely scenario, you got to bet that game because they're 3-point underdogs right now.
It's nuts.
But Landry ranks 5th in expected fantasy points per game, 6th in targets per game, 9th in air yards per game, 7th in expected touchdowns per game. What does that mean? It means as good as he was last year when he finished 4th in fantasy points per game, his usage is even better this year, and it's significantly different than last year. He was in a low upside, low ADOT role where he wasn't used heavily near the end zone. All that's changed, making him an even better value on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, though he's a great value on both. Also, of course, the departure of Josh Gordon and the arrival or ascension of Baker Mayfield to starter is huge for him. Including the preseason, Landry was targeted once every 2.9 routes by Mayfield. That would easily lead the position this year or any year of the past 10 years. On top of that, we should expect efficiency to improve. Last year, Baker Mayfield had a near perfect 146.6 passer rating when targeting slot wide receivers. That was also his favorite position to target. And then on top of all of this, the usage, the new quarterback, et cetera, the match was fantastic. Oakland's giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers, and that's where he runs 75% of his routes.
All right, Tyler, let's go to – I'm going to have to sneeze here. Professional, I hit the mute button, though, so everyone didn't have to. So value wide receiver. Let's see here. You've got Sterling Shepard, which I love. I absolutely love Sterling Shepard without Evan Ingram in here. This is where you're going to want to attack the Saints. They've got an injury in their secondary. I think that's good. I want to question you. Is it Sterling Shepard? We've got Tyler Boyd, who's also probably too cheap. We've got Calvin Ridley from last week, who scored a bajillion points, all in this same tier, just under 5,000. This is what makes it easy. Not only are the sub 5,000 running backs plentiful, but the sub 5,000 wide receivers are some of the best options we've had all season right now.
Yeah, you can go with any of those guys as great options this week to save some salary. Mix and match if you need to. Any one of those could go off. I like Sterling Shepard a bit more because, like you said, there's no Evan Ingram. It's also one of the highest scoring games of the slate. Actually, I take that back because the other two are playing in the highest slate. I think Shepard's a great matchup here, though, just because the Saints just lost their slot cornerback, Patrick Robertson. He was our highest-graded slot cornerback last year. Just placed him on IR. That means P.J. Williams will now get the unenviable task of trying to slow down Shep. He's coming off a 20-point fantasy point outing last week. Among the 91 corners that have faced at least 50 targets dating back to the beginning of last year, P.J. Williams has allowed the 12th highest QB rating when targeted against. I think he's a very easy target for Eli Manning to get across the middle of the field. Shep's seen 7 or more targets in 4 of his last 5 games. I think we could see that number climb this week in a shootout.
Yeah, I don't know where it was, but the Sterling Shepard number since Shepard's been drafted, he's basically played the same amount of games as Odell Beckham Jr., and they have extremely similar stat lines in their production since that. Now, I know it's a little bit different when they're playing together, but I love Shepard at 4,900. That's a great play this week. Scott, you're going a little off the board. This is targets, first price, and then you have the brick wall of a matchup here. So this is Quincy Enunwa against Jacksonville. What do you see here that makes you want to play Enunwa?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel
the
like
targets look real nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of really cheap guys. I like Tyler Boyd a lot. I like Taylor Gabriel, who I talked about too. Nunn was just seeing awesome volume. He's led the team in targets for 3 straight weeks. Ranks 4th among all wide receivers in routes per target, 9th in target market share. But he runs 72% of his routes from the slot, and Jacksonville's one of only 7 teams to surrender more fantasy points to the slot rather than to outside wide receivers. So the matchup, on the whole, Jacksonville, of course, is fantastic, but it's not terrible for him in this individual matchup in the slot.
Yeah, there's so many good names. There's Antonio Callaway, who's playing a ton of snaps. You got Christian Kirk. He's starting to come through. He's playing starters reps even with Larry Fitzgerald right now. Cheap wide receivers are plentiful. I don't really think you can go wrong with pretty much anybody we've mentioned here. There's a ton of good plays in my opinion. Tyler, your dud, Marvin Jones. So here's what I've ascertained through the Lions. You don't want this game. I think this game's going to be really slow. But when next week comes up, if the Lions have a good matchup, you just play whoever the cheapest Lions receiver is. And I think that's how I'm going to be approaching it moving forward.
Yeah, they're very much like the Rams, where you just want to play at least one of the guys, and they're almost matchup independent, where you're just looking for the cheapest option. Marvin Jones, though, I'm not interested in at all this week. You mentioned the pace. I think it's going to be brutal against Jones in this passing attack. And Dallas has some really standout corners that are playing exceptionally well. So it's going to be a low volume and a really tough matchup. It's actually the most difficult matchup that he could have. It's against our number 1 graded cornerback, Byron Jones. And unlike other Detroit wideouts, Jones' 18.3 ADOT, which is top 5 among double-digit target wideouts, doesn't really let him get the cheap receptions underneath and pile up yardage after the catch. Byron Jones is allowing just a 44% catch rate and a 51.8 QB rating when targeted against. I'm just going to fade Marvin Jones and pretty much this whole Detroit passing attack.
Yeah, Marvin, the price is really nice, right? 5,200, but I'd take that step down to the sub 5K wide receivers without even thinking twice about it this week. Scott, you've got your dud. Chris Hogan, just a really tough matchup. You've talked about Miami's perimeter defense. Let's see, where's his I forgot the one cornerback's name, but basically elite production since I think about the middle of last season.
Yeah, he's also just seeing 12 targets. He's an easy one.
Just a complete fade. All right, Scott putting in 100% effort on the Chris Hogan call on a fade. I agree, too. This is more of a Gronk game. We got to see if Josh Gordon plays at all. I'm completely off Chris Hogan. I have him in a season-long dynasty. I don't want to start him, but I kind of have to because that's how deep dynasty leagues sometimes work. Let's keep moving along here. So we're actually making some pretty good time. So we're gonna have I'm gonna have to come up with some stuff on the fly here. But let's move to tight ends. Tyler, you can make this work this week if Scott's right with Chris Hogan, and he's got a really tough matchup. Gronk disappointed last week. He's still pretty high priced on DraftKings, in my opinion, at 7,000. I would like to see him back at that 6,900 to really want to use Gronk. It's probably just $100 too much. But you got to think he's going to have to get involved if the Patriots are going to score some points. And you can make it work this week in tournaments. It's not hard to find value.
Yeah, I think he's a kind of contrarian price option, though, where he's very pricey compared to the next highest tight end, which is Zach Ertz. 800 more on DK, 1,100 more on FanDuel. But it's a really good matchup here. The Dolphins allowed the most yardage, second most receiving touchdowns, and third most fantasy points to opposing tight ends last year. Safety Rashad Jones missed last week's game. That's when old man Jordy Nelson went loose. Yep. If Jordy Nelson can go big on them, I'm hoping that Brady targets Gronk a bit more in this matchup here. Rashad Jones is still remaining limited in practice this week. Gronk has scored 8 touchdowns in 11 career games against Miami. I mean, it's Gronk. Like, fade at your own risk.
Yeah, I think he's a great player. The problem is I do like a couple of the cheaper tight ends. We'll talk about those in a second. Scott, yours, you've got a stud. I mean, how do you fade Zach Ertz? You know there's going to be a lot of targets, 10, 13, and 10 over his first 3 weeks. Dallas Goedert went off last week. I want to talk about Dallas Goedert too, Scott, from last week. This is like my biggest regret. Looking back at the guys who had big performances last week, this is one that nobody was on that we should have been able to see coming, right? Without Mike Wallace, without Alshon Jeffrey, the Eagles should have gone like more tight end too. It made a lot of sense for us to use Goddard. I missed it. I think everybody missed it in DFS last week. That was one of my biggest takeaways. But you got to like Ertz, 6,200, pretty good prices.
Yeah, so we can talk about both of them because Goddard's actually also my value, just because Tyler got to the sheet before me when the correct answer is Eric Ebron. But, Goddard's like a decent second, $300 off minimum price on DraftKings. But that's all contingent upon if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't play. But Goddard as my value play, he ran 27 routes last week. That's the same number as Njoku. Also the same number as Gronkowski. You saw 7 targets, only 4 tight ends. Saw more than that. It feels like chasing points, but I don't think it is. He's also amazing. You can go back and read some of my articles from May on why he was easily the best receiving tight end in the class and maybe best receiving tight end in some time. But again, that's definitely contingent upon Jeffrey being out.
What about Sproles? If Sproles and Jeffrey are back, clear stay away. Even if Sproles plays, I think I'm still going to stay away from Goddard a little bit.
Interesting. Maybe. But Ertz, so the thing is Ertz definitely disappointed in terms of production relative to Goddard, whatever. But really their volume was way better for Ertz. So Ertz had 18.3 expected fantasy points. Goddard only had 12.1. Goddard was just far more efficient. Ertz is going to find the end zone. Volume's going to be awesome. It's been awesome. Here's the stat. So in his last 16 full games, so he didn't leave early with an injury, with Carson Wentz under center, Ertz averages 17.2 fantasy points per game. That's not only easy number 1 tight end fantasy numbers, but it's also mid-range wide receiver 1 numbers, which makes his salary look super cheap in comparison. Really, he's gotten a little bit unlucky in the touchdown department, and I think positive regression's coming, and why not this week?
Yeah, I love Ertz. I do love to see on Goddard. It's just looking back, Scott, right? We should have seen that as a possibility last week, and I think the whole DFS space missed it, including myself.
It was coming week 1, and then I just kind of it didn't, and I kind of forgot about him.
Yeah, so you got to, I don't know, thinking about things like that in hindsight can help you try to figure it out in the future. So that's kind of something I always try to do. Tyler, let's get to a couple other guys here. Eric Ebron had all the targets. Still, Jack Doyle looks pretty iffy to play as we sit here on Wednesday night, in my opinion. And if Eric Ebron's going to get 11 targets, it's pretty hard not to play a $3,600 Eric Ebron in a dome against Houston. This is like a no-brainer play.
Yeah, fired up with confidence. He had 11 targets last week. 4 of them came inside the Eagles' 20-yard line. Houston's allowing the 4th most touchdowns to opposing tight ends, and they've allowed them to score in 2 of 3 games to start the year. I mean, it's a lock.
Yeah, absolutely lock. I want to hit on a couple other cheap tight ends and see which one of these is the premier standout for you. So, Scott, I'll start with you. We've got Ben Watson against the Giants, and I want to get your thoughts on this. His snaps really decreased last week when Cameron Meredith came back. So I want to get your thoughts on if he's viable. We've got David Njoku, who, if he can catch the ball from Baker Mayfield, he's going to see a big uptick now. I think he's really going to take off here to start the end of the season. Austin Hooper in what should be a high-scoring game. There are some really good value plays at tight end. Do any of those stand out for you?
Yeah, just regarding Watson, I want to reiterate that the Giants are no longer a tight end funnel defense. They're just bad everywhere. And Njoku, yeah, why not? I love Baker. Josh Gordon's no longer on the team. I do really like Antonio Callaway. He saw great usage last week. But, we did see a 2-touchdown preseason game between Njoku and Baker Mayfield. So who knows? Maybe that happens again this week.
All right. Tyler, a couple of duds for you here at tight end. You've got ASJ. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to play ASJ probably the entire season, and I certainly don't see myself doing that. He's another guy. All the Cowboys except Zeke and definitely ASJ. These guys don't exist for me.
Yeah, I think that's a smart move. The likely return of Fournette means the pass-happy ways of Bortles is probably coming to an end. ASJ wasn't really even a true beneficiary of those 2 pass-happy games. Saw just 41 yards over that span. Jamal Adams playing really well right now as safety, who will likely defend the tight end, our number 17 safety. Yeah, it's an easy fade. Forget the revenge narrative. That's not happening.
Yeah, these are guys when I make I think I'm going to have, 300, 400, 500 something lineups this week in tournaments. I just X them right out of the lineup HQ here. They do not exist to me. Scott, you're a dud at tight end. Ricky Seals-Jones, he's got Rosen back in. Rosen's going to be starting here.
I actually changed it.
Oh, what do you got? Who is it then?
Sorry, OJ Howard.
All right.
I felt bad because the rest of my duds were kind of straightforward and obvious.
All right.
So I'm getting kind of sneaky here. I actually really like Ryan Fitzpatrick this week. The guy's done something historic, the 4th most fantasy points by a quarterback through any 3-week stretch ever. And for some reason, he's going to be low owned this week. That's going to be a mistake, pretty sure. But yeah, OJ Howard. So he's running big boy routes now. He's seeing big boy targets, putting up some numbers. All that's great, but here's my theory on this. So he was the primary blocking tight end last year. He leads in pass blocking snaps again this year, but it's closer. But he is the better pass blocker, and significantly so in comparison to Cameron Brate. So Chicago ranks 8th in pressures with 45, but Khalil Mack's made up a whopping 20 of those. That's like ridiculous, and that would drop him all the way down to 30th. So my theory is, because Todd Monken is a genius offensive coordinator, they leave him in to block Mack for a high percentage of the game, and even when not, it'll be like chip blocks. So he wouldn't have like full routes to develop. So I think this caps his upside. That's my theory.
If you like Ryan Fitzpatrick, I will tell you the Bears are going to be one of the highest owned defenses we've probably seen this season. Outside of that Houston week where Houston fell completely on their face, I think that was week 2. The Bears, they're 2,600 on DraftKings at home against what I probably think is an overperforming Tampa Bay offense. I think they're going to be the highest owned defense of the week by far. So if you like that, Scott, you're going to find yourself up with a millionaire maker with a low owned Ryan Fitzpatrick, because nobody's going to be playing him against the Bears.
Let's do it.
So that's going to do it for this. I got to make up a couple things here on the fly to finish up our segment. So I want to talk about games we think might go over the totals or have a little bit more scoring than we kind of think. Obviously, we have the Saints-Giants game and the Falcons-Bengals game. I'm excluding those from this conversation. There's going to be like 7 more podcasts and 5,000 articles here on RotoGrinders for people to hear about that.
Listen, I just told you what the sneaky shootout is.
The Tampa Bay games for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Chicago's pass rush is sick, but it's only one guy. If you take that away, it's significantly less so. But this is 2 pass funnel defenses, both ranked bottom 3 in rushing yards allowed. 84% of Tampa Bay's yards allowed has been via the pass. That's most in the league. 77% of Chicago's yards allowed has been via the pass. It's 4th most. 85% of Tampa Bay's yards on offense has come via the pass. That's easily the most. What he's doing is like utterly historic. Only quarterback ever with 3 straight 400 passing yard games. He's fighting for his job. No one's
seen the Ryan Fitzpatrick circle, right? Where he plays really good for a couple of games.
It's not the player; it's the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, well, Dirk Cutter's been horrible for a while, so he needed to give up those play callings. You really think that's changed this entire time?
It's Todd Monken, man. He's a genius. Look at what he's doing with the downfield aerial assault. It's a thing of beauty.
The targets are definitely there. The weaponry that Ryan Fitzpatrick has is definitely there. I won't argue on that. That'll be something I'll have to load that into the lineup HQ here when I make a couple teams for you, Scott. Mine, I like this Houston Indy game. I think
Bingo.
I think Indianapolis will be able to do those short passes, Tyler. Houston's going to be chucking it deep. That's what Deshaun Watson does. Will Fuller is unstoppable since he's been hooked up with Deshaun Watson, and then you also have to account for DeAndre Hopkins, and nobody else is getting targets in this offense. It's very concentrated, makes it really easy for fantasy. You could run it back with an Ebron, you can run it back with a Hilton, and still make your lineup look pretty good this week. That's going to be one of my favorite game stacks here.
Yeah, I agree completely. When I first started making tournament lineups, they were all Watson, Fuller, and then running back with Ebron and a little bit of Nuke as well. Like you said, Hilton, I think he could take any 6-yard slant to the house, especially against these Houston corners. They are not good.
Why Nuke when Fuller's outscored him in 3 of his last 4 games with Deshaun Watson?
You got to use both. If you didn't see my article, the game stacks with you just jam in as many players from the same game as you can now in DFS. That's what seems to be winning. I don't know if it's going to continue that trend, especially this week with the lower totals. So I'm going to have to debate what I'm doing here. But it's just all these game stacks. You get in the right game. It's a passing league. You can't touch the quarterback. You breathe on him. You get a 15-yard penalty. It extends the drives. Pass interference is getting called. There's the most penalties that have ever been called in the league so far through 3 weeks. It's just an offensive league. Scoring's up. The game stacks are going nuts, Tyler. So stack up this Houston game. Fit 5, 6 of them on there if you want. You got another one, Tyler? I stole your thunder on that one. You got another game?
Honestly, no, I'm pretty concise with my tournaments. I'm just going to do that and focus on the Falcons-Bengals. I think it's the highest game on the slate for a reason. I think both these defenses are bad, and we could see a lot of passing here.
All right. Scott, you got any final thoughts on anything we talked about today?
No, just I agree with Indeed Texans. Texans are probably the second best defense to attack outside of New Orleans.
Yep, I love that game quite a bit. So we're going to get on out of here. Thanks to Scott and Tyler from PFF for joining me today. If you want to check out Pro Football Focus, you can get access to Scott's actual opportunity, along with Pat Thorman's article, along with the grades, along with a lot of other statistics. I think it's just $40 a month for their basic subscription. And if you want to get the premium stats and the green line, they bump it up quite a bit. I think that's hovering around 200, but some of the information you get on there is so good. If you're a high stakes DFS player, you're going to want access to it. It's all exportable into CSV. So if you're good in Excel, you can kind of manipulate that all behind the scenes every week to get all your advanced data pretty easily. And I encourage you to check it out. Something I look at every week. So for Scott and Tyler, I'm Britt. Thanks for watching, everybody. We out.